Picture the scene. You live in a close-knit community of some 100 people near the west bank of the River Jordan. But don't panic. It's 10,000 BC and your tribe's the only one in the region. Members of your group feed themselves on wild plants and animals which live and breed without your intervention, as humans have done for some 2.5 million years, and your bodies and minds are perfectly adapted to this lifestyle of hunter-gathering, which provides you a varied diet and a fulfilling life which keeps you fit. This is what humans were made for, and of course it would be naive of me to say that this lifestyle didn't come with its challenges, although I'm more than happy to do that. Hunter-gathering with your mates just sounds great. But around 10,000 BC, Homo sapiens slowly began to devote almost all of their time to manipulating the lives of just a few organisms to feed themselves. This is known as the agricultural revolution, and hear me out, because I know you're probably watching this somewhere comfortable and thinking, how could stopping being bloody cavemen have been a bad thing? I'm going to explain how the invent of farming is one of history's greatest blunders. So around 9000 BC, wheat was domesticated in the Middle East, and by 3500 BC, rice, maize, or corn if there's any Yanks watching, potatoes, millet, barley, horses, olives and grapes had all been domesticated. And even today, 90% of the calories we consume comes from these plants and animals domesticated during this time. We really do have hunter-gatherer brains in the diets of ancient farmers. The human population exploded, but no sane person would have really cared about that. You care about your livelihood and those of the people around you. So did the agricultural revolution make people's lives better? The short answer is no. And it's important to note that this change didn't occur overnight, and people back then, like most people in history, lived very similar lives to those of the previous generation. So our group of 100 hunter-gatherers who roamed the area around Jericho 10,000 years ago used to stop and harvest this patch of grains for, let's say, 7 days every year. And one day one of them said, "Let's stay here for a bit longer, lads. We can gather lots of grains and have lots to eat." His mates said,
"That's a great idea."
So they ate well that year and even had a surplus of food, so their population maybe increased to 102. This population increase meant that the next year the same guy said, "Let's stay here until we have the same amount of excess food as last year." His mates said,
"Sure thing, boss."
And the group maybe stayed 8 days that year. A number of generations later, the group was now 300 strong and lived in a semi-permanent camp next to the wheat. They hunter-gathered sometimes, but there was a lot of them, so returning to the wheat every year was essential to feed everyone. A number of generations after that, our group has swelled to 1,000 in a permanent village. They gradually relied on crops more and more each year until no one knew they'd ever lived another way. The people around Jericho had settled down, as had people all over the world in independent agricultural revolutions in South America, Mexico, China, Papua New Guinea and Africa. These being the places that plants that could be domesticated lived. And agriculture was so time consuming that it forced people to settle. The neighbouring hunter-gatherers were forced to do the same, otherwise the growing populations of these agricultural towns would simply outcompete them, since their women could have babies every year. And scholars once believed that this was a natural progression as humans became more intelligent, going from the hard life of a hunter-gatherer to the satiated, pleasant one of a farmer. And this is just because of the romanticised idea that we have of agriculture in our modern affluent world. And I'm sure all the countless millions who've died due to crop failures and famines in history wouldn't say that their hard lives and horrible deaths were worth it just to increase humanity's population. That would be mad. Foragers were no less intelligent than humans, and they were some of the most skilled people in history. After a countless number of small changes they made to make their lifestyles slightly better, the species which had once had a varied, healthy diet whilst roaming in close-knit communities now found itself in isolating houses in cramped villages, breaking their backs under the sun, watering, weeding, ploughing and planting fields, all in exchange for a mostly grain diet which isn't good for human health and made people more vulnerable to the diseases which thrived in these villages. Infant mortality skyrocketed, but the human population continued to rise. The average farmer worked much harder than the average gatherer and got a much worse deal from it. Besides, we assume in the modern world that our ancestors tamed nature to their will and domesticated it, and that's true. Domesticate comes from the Latin domus for house, and humans have brought numerous crops and animals such as this idiot into our homes and human-managed farms. But initially it was wheat which fed humans, got humans to work for its benefit and ultimately put humans in houses in the first place. By definition, domesticating humans and becoming one of the most successful plants in the world, which covers a staggering amount of the modern Earth's surface. The personal political structure of some 100 people couldn't be translated to these groups, which now numbered in the thousands, hundreds of thousands and ultimately millions. Grain silos and fields had to be protected, workers had to be controlled to ensure the survival of the population, so people were organised into city-states, kingdoms and empires to ensure this control. An aristocratic group lived off the surplus created by the general population they lorded over. By the 1st century AD, most humans were agriculturalists. Agricultural societies were also less flexible. A disease could wipe out the crop, causing a famine, where hunter-gatherers could have just left to find something else if the hunting was bad in a region. And when threatened by another group, a small group of hunter-gatherers could have just left. However, the population of a kingdom couldn't survive this way, and due to this, deaths due to human violence increased during this time. People were forced to fight to the bitter end to defend their fields and livelihood during increasingly violent conflicts, as well as endure the tyrannies of kings and pharaohs and the serf societies of the Bronze Age. But how did we make such a mistake, and why couldn't we go back? In the same sense as people working super hard when they're young in the hopes of an early retirement, only to find that they have to continue working to fund the lifestyle that they're now used to when they're older, as well as pay for their family, have fallen into the trap of thinking that more luxuries will make them happier, when luxuries eventually become necessities, just another thing you have to maintain, have fallen into what's known as a luxury trap. The generations of early farmers worked hard to ensure a better life for their many children, but as the population grew, so did the amount of food required, so their children had to increase the production by planting even more fields. But the population couldn't go back to how it was before. No one was going to volunteer to starve to death. They were stuck, and this is how the early farmers unknowingly dug the human race into this hole. So from the affluence of many of our lives in the modern day, it's easy to say the agricultural revolution was good for humanity. It did increase our population to exponentially more than could have been sustained by hunter-gathering, and freed up time for arts, literature and history to occur. But this wasn't worth it for the vast majority of people in history. I'm not talking about the recorded history of power passing between rival aristocrats, but the lives of the general population spent hunched over in diseased farms in the blistering heat, trying to hoard enough food to pay taxes to the king and not starve to death in winter. The agricultural revolution had been a bad deal for the average person, and no one agreed to this deal. It was a trap. Thanks for watching.
That's a nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is...
Well, let me have a rule and a saw and a board and I'll cut it. I'll climb up a ladder with a hammer and a nail and I'll nail it.